I'm in my room. My computer is on in front of me with my microphone. There's a notepad open with some notes about my podcast. It's time to rewind. It looks like they're open to the 25th scene of Memento that starts in color at 52 minutes and 46 seconds, with Leonard getting in his car with a paper bag, and ends at 55 minutes and 37 seconds, with Leonard putting out the remains of a wood fire in the early light of dawn. There appears to also be a Skype window open. Oh, hang on. Who is this?
Bubbawheat, it's your co-host, Eric Deutsch.
Oh, it's of course. And who is this?
It's JD from In Session Film.
Oh, of course. Welcome. It's been a long time since we've talked. I feel like the last time I want to say that we did a podcast together was before your son was born and your podcast was still in double digits.
That is a long time. It has been a while. So yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's glad to have you on, and I'm, we talked just a minute before we started recording, and I'm glad that this is your introduction to the not quite the minute by minute formats, but the breaking down a movie scene by scene.
Yeah, it's I've never really been on a podcast that has this format, this structure. And honestly, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. I still don't know what to expect. I'm just going to see how this goes. That's part of the intrigue, not only to reconnect with you and talk to you guys about this movie, but also just see what this experience is like. So, I'm ready to dive in.
Sure. And before we jump into today's scene, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your history with Memento? Like, do you remember the first time that you saw the movie?
Yeah, the first time I saw it wasn't quite when it came out. It was some years afterwards. I was in college, I believe, and it was a little overwhelming, I think, when you're, 23 years old and you don't know who Christopher Nolan is at this point. At least I didn't know who Chris Nolan was when I first walked into this movie. And it's unlike anything that you've seen when you're 22 years old. So that first go around, it was a little overwhelming. And then I caught up with it again some years later, before we started In Session Film, maybe around 2010, 2011, something like that. And, at that point, it immediately hit me in a different way. And I really loved the film, loved its audaciousness and what Christopher Nolan is trying to do here, and all of its intricate nuances in terms of storytelling, psychology, and just what makes this film so great. And I hadn't seen it since then. So it was a film that I came to love. And then a decade goes by and you start a podcast and you get married and you have a child and just so much of life happens. So I just hadn't seen this film until I was prepping for this episode, or these next episodes that I'm going to be a part of. And it was great to revisit it once again. But yeah, that's my experience. It's been a while between the last time and now.
Yeah, that seems to be a running theme with a lot of the guests that we've talked to so far. It's and I'm glad to give a lot of people the excuse to revisit this movie, because I know that was the same for me too. It had been a long time since I had revisited this movie, but diving into it this way is really renewing my love for it again.
Nice. Yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah. So jumping into this scene, he just gets into the car, and it's like clearly the middle of the night. It's very dark, and he goes to this. This was actually shot in the same refinery that houses the abandoned building that we see at the beginning of the end of the movie. And it's just like Christopher Nolan said, it's just a big complex that has a lot of and that has an interesting look to it, and I agree with
Sure.
that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I do like the aesthetic of this sequence, and it's initially anyway, before you kind of cut to the flashback, when he's there by the fire, it's so darkly lit, and there's something about the ambiance of the scene that is not just dark, but there's a somber nature to it that I think is wonderfully reflective of what's happening internally with
Mhm.
our central character here. So as far as an aesthetic perspective goes, it's really great. And then, of course, the bookend of it all at the end, in terms of lighting and aesthetic, and also where he is mentally, I think is interesting. So just from a visual perspective, there's actually a lot going on to the scene that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it falls in an interesting place in the movie too, because this is basically right after the the big
Mhm.
frenetic chase scene with Dodd. And
Yeah.
then we
Mhm.
cut to this. I mean, it's broken up with a very brief, I think one of the shortest black and white scenes.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and then we get to this, and the music is very melancholy and a little eerie, and you don't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
what's going on and what's in this paper bag, like where Leonard is and what he's doing here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about the music, because the music is very dramatic. It's very intense, and as the
Mhm.
viewer, you think something major is about to happen in this movie here. I mean, it's building up to that, and in the context of the movie, though, it's really not that major. But in the context of his life, this is a major event, though, what he's
Yes.
doing
Yeah.
here. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of it's an interesting twist that as the viewer you're like, oh boy, something's going to happen, especially because of what just happened in the movie as the viewer.
Mhm.
And then you're like, oh, he's just kind of sitting here burning stuff. But to him, well, yeah, this is an incredibly dramatic moment.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting sleight of hand that, yeah, dramatically, maybe you're anticipating something, especially when you're coming off the heels of that scene previously where, he's running from someone that's trying to kill him. So maybe this is an extension of that. And then as you're talking about, it's not that at all, but it is pivotal. It is absolutely a vital scene in this film. And I think you can really sum up the thesis of it when he says, I've probably tried this before. I can't remember to forget you, which I think is such a devastating and poignant line that I think in many ways is the driving vehicle of much of the film, let alone that scene. But given what he's trying to do symbolically, can't remember if he's done this before, but still making an attempt to try to heal, even though he knows that he really can't, which is something he also speaks to in this film about making memories, the fact that he can, and by proxy, it's a struggle for him to heal over what happened with his wife, to grieve, and how that through line plays throughout the film. I think is fascinating. But in this scene, it's absolutely the beating heart of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can't remember to forget you. That's just the depths of the despair of that line is
Yeah,
just brutal.
it's absolutely brutal. Yeah.
yeah, and something like one other thing that Christopher Nolan mentions in the commentary is that throughout the movie he wanted to show different ways that Leonard tries to fix his memory, and the tattoos is one big way that they show, and then he looks at this as sort of another way that he tries to fix his memory. It's where he views this as like this ritual burning of items, and
Mhm.
in order to basically try and destroy these memories in a certain way.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get to those items,
Yeah.
the mementos of Catherine, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, he starts out with a teddy bear,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and I mean that's very sad. Teddy bear being burned.
Mhm.
You know, everyone as a kid had some kind of stuffed animal, and I actually still have my favorite one, and I'm a 47-year-old man. That is brutal to be burning a teddy bear.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's like it could have like one of two meanings to it. This could either be like her childhood teddy bear, or
Mhm.
it could be something like that he bought for them at the beginning of their relationship.
Or
Because
that he
I
had
know,
one for
Yes.
her at a carnival or something like that.
Because
Yeah.
I know, like with my wife, one keepsake that we have from very like one of the first couple times that we saw each other, I gave her a Grateful Dead bear that I got from my work,
Mhm.
and she still has that.
Yeah, my wife has her childhood teddy bears as well. Like she had to retire them when our son was born because he ended up taking that slot on the bed. So they have been retired since, but she still has them. And I think what's interesting is that whether it be representative of her childhood, or maybe it's something that that Leonard had bought her, or maybe they won at a fair, regardless of how it came into their possession, it still represents some sort of innocence, whether it be her childhood or their relationship. Uh, and so to see that thrown into the fire, given the film's somber tone, is yeah, it's saddening. It one little visual is it does evoke this saddening quality to it.
Yeah, and then the next item that he picks up is the hairbrush.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an interesting choice for a couple different reasons, because I mean, one is that it does still have her hair, so it's like literally
Mm-hmm.
a piece of her. But at
Hmm.
the same
Yeah.
time, just like whenever he was remembering his wife with Natalie at the diner, a hairbrush is a very mundane item.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And during the memory of it, we see something that becomes a very major plot point. Of course, later in the movie, he pinches her leg and she says, "Ouch."
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
of course, that becomes a pretty big deal later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny too, because as I was watching this, I wrote down in my notes something that we talked about in an earlier episode. That for a minute we thought that this was Georgia Fox's only speaking line in this movie, but we both
Mm-hmm.
apparently forgot about the book line that comes up in
Mm.
this scene as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. The hairbrush that you're talking about, I mean, certainly, yeah, one of the most mundane items, but and what's interesting, the film obviously can't real. I don't think there's any sort of visual that cues us into this. There's the physicality angle of it as well. But I also wonder, and maybe this is weird, I don't know, but I also wonder what it would smell like. Like, does it still evoke what she smelt like? Maybe that's part of it as well. And
I think it's interesting that you bring up smell, because I have that, because the third item that he picks up is the book,
mm,
and he opens it up and he smells the book, and
okay,
the
yeah,
smell is what triggers his next flashback.
yes. So yeah, so maybe that is part of it with the hairbrush, certainly with the book. Uh, and but I mean, smell obviously evokes memories, broadly speaking, in all of us. So how memory works with him here is fascinating. That he's able to still harken back to something that is vivid to him because of that. So there is the physicality of her hair being a part of it, maybe smell, and then it comes in with the book as well. And that flashback that we get regarding the book and the dynamic there is really great. And again, a mundane moment in his life at that time, I'm sure. And now it's something that he clings to like it's oxygen.
Yeah, and
And
not only is it mundane, but it's slightly combative too.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
happy
Yeah.
memory.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, before we get to that part, I want to say with the smelling of the book, I can imagine that the book has her smell like maybe the hairbrush might. And the smell of books, the smell of old bookstores is a
Mm-hmm.
pretty common item on lists of people's favorite smells.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so when he does smell the book, he's probably not smelling her. He's just smelling the old pages of the book that she always used to read.
And loved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and loved, right? Because then when we do get to that flashback, he just doesn't understand why is she reading the same book over and over again. And
Mm-hmm.
what are you doing that? I thought you want to read a book because you want to know what happens next, implying if you've already read it, you know what happens next. And to your
Yeah, and
point, it's a combative memory. It's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting because
yeah, she says, "Don't be a
don't be
prick."
a prick. I'm not reading it to annoy you. I enjoy it. Just let me read, please. And gives her like this. He gives this little smile at the end. She gives him. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing I found about that line, when taken as a whole, is it would kind of play as sort of a goofy relationship stuff, except for the "I'm not reading it to annoy you" part. That kind of stuck out to me as sort of odd. There's background there in their relationship that we, the viewers, do not get. Of why would she say, "I'm not reading this book to annoy you"?
Yeah. I mean, because he does come off a little bit annoyed, or at least he doesn't understand why she keeps doing it. I think what's also interesting about that exchange is that it's a little meta with this film as a whole, because here we are watching or discussing a movie that we've seen several times over. I've only seen it 3 times. I'm sure there are others that have watched this over and over again. And with Memento, it's interesting because this is a film that you don't really watch to just see what happens next on these rewatches, because there's so much to enjoy and so much to peel apart with this film that, it's like you don't keep going back to Mementos just because you know what's going to happen. Like, there is kind of this allure to this film that keeps you coming back to it and wanting to dissect it even further. So I do like how it kind of connects in that way.
Yeah, I also wanted to comment on the meta nature, because Leonard's line is he always thought the pleasure of a book was in wanting to know what happens next. But the way that this movie is structured, we know what happens
already know.
next.
Yeah.
And we're wanting to see what happened earlier.
That's a great point too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that bit. And I love the look of this book. I mean, the prop masters did a great job. This looks like a book that's been read 1,000 times. I mean, the cover's missing, and that also helps with the anonymity, because you can't tell, this is like an anonymous book. It's not like there is no meaning behind what book it is. It could be any book, and it is like it represents any book, because really the only thing you can see is chapter 1.
Sure.
So it looks like a long book, that's for sure.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, so you get the exchange, and for all the reasons that we're talking about, you think of why this memory means something to him, despite how combative it was or how annoyed he must have felt at the time. But it's something that now it obviously means something to him in some way. And what's interesting, what Nolan does is that when he puts it in the fire, man, the camera lingers on it for a good long beat. It's not a quick shot of it in the fire. It lingers there for a moment. So I do think that Nolan is trying to emphasize that in a significant way.
Yeah. And then we get to the last item, which is a clock. The clock that was on the nightstand.
Yeah.
And of course that is very representative of time, the time that he spent together with his life, and the time that's basically lost to Leonard now because of his condition.
And it's also what Nolan thinks of time. I just throw it in the fire.
I wonder what the significance is that, if there is any, that the hairbrush and the book both have him flash back to memories that we see, but the teddy bear and the clock don't. And I just wonder what the directorial decision was behind not all 4 of them, or if it was a time thing. Oh, I should only do 2 of them, and making those the 2 that they chose to show.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah,
I would think that it's probably just a time that's that there wasn't enough time in this moment to have 4 separate flashbacks, and they just focused on the 2 of the more important ones, and it kept and skipped the other 2.
Yeah. If I had to stretch a little bit, I think maybe you can talk about how the clock is certainly symbolism for how much time he's lost with her because of what happened, and also maybe because of this condition that he has. Time is, it works differently for him than it does for everybody else. So perhaps
it's almost like time is meaningless to him now.
It's meaningless
to him. Yep.
And he does speak to that a couple of times in the film. And then there's another scene. Sorry, I'm kind of breaking the boundaries here a little bit, but there's another scene where we do see the teddy bear on the pillow. And even though it wasn't his wife that placed it there, and obviously that scene is doing some interesting things as well. But maybe if we're trying to kind of pull from that a little bit, maybe Nolan is suggesting that, even though his wife didn't put it there on the pillow, maybe maybe that was his relationship with that teddy bear still, because when he sees it there on the pillow, he doesn't react, out of to him, he's not surprised. Like there's no sort of like, oh, I've never seen this there before. Like that felt normal to him. So maybe even though it was coincidental with how it is out kind of from a plotting perspective, maybe symbolically and emotionally that does offer some truth to why he picked the teddy bear in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually that kind of ties into the last note that I have for this scene, because in the voiceover at the end, he mentions that he's probably tried doing this dozens of times.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But this group of items, to me, almost feels like it should have been the first batch of items, because these feel like very important items. Like that, does it feel like do you get that too, or does this feel like this is the the 10th group of items that he's burned, or does this feel like this should have been the first one, or like maybe these are the ones that he's saving and this is like the last group that he's finally burning?
Yeah, I think it clearly, I think because this clearly was her favorite book, and because it involves something as sentimental as a teddy bear, I think either these are the things you burn first or last, depending on how you're handling things.
Yeah. And because of how, the film crystallizes what we know he's doing on the whole, as it circles back to Teddy, pun intended, I guess, that maybe there is an intentionality there with that. It's also interesting too, because obviously with his condition, it's not something that he can really plan ahead. So I don't know. I think it's interesting because maybe it's just accidental that this is how it played out, or maybe he had some sort of note that we as the audience don't see, that where he saved this for last after he decided to go after Teddy the way that he does. But also, and I think one of you spoke to this earlier as well, there's elements to this relationship that obviously we don't know. And maybe there's, like, on that first go round, there were more sentimental items that he felt were more representative of their relationship he did the first time around. I mean, we just don't know, but obviously in the way Nolan depicts it here, these items still mean a lot to him. So regardless of how that shakes out, it's still effective emotionally speaking and symbolically.
Yeah. And that's all I have for this scene. Do either of you have anything else that you want to mention about this scene specifically?
The only other one I wanted to say was going back to Leonard's not understanding why she loves reading this book so much, and how much she loves reading it again. I feel like the world's two kind of people. You're either a Leonard or a Catherine here. You either love reading books more than once, or you do not understand why anyone would read a book more than once. And I wonder what the character of Leonard would think of us movies by minuters who watch a movie a minute at a time and pore over the minutia.
I guess my last final thought would just be Guy Pearce. His performance here in this scene, I think, is really great, because there is some dialogue. We've talked about some of the poignancy of it, but also a lot of this scene is him performing internally, right? So much of this performance is introspective, and him grappling with his grief and the memories that he does have that he can cherish. And, I just feel like when he's sitting there at the fire, looking at these items and grappling with what they mean to him, like, he's able to convey as much as he does when he is speaking. And those are often my favorite performances, which is why I really love his performance here on the whole, because I think throughout the whole film, he does such a great job with that. But this is one of the best scenes of the film, where him conveying so much without saying anything at all. It's really great from a performance perspective.
Yeah, I've brought up a lot that his performance, like his character as Leonard, feels almost emotionless at times, but in a lot of ways, maybe emotionless is too strong of a word, but he does show his emotions very subtly.
Yeah, it's a very subtle performance. Yeah, 100%.
And I think he does do that very well, and especially in these next couple color scenes that we're going to be talking about in the next couple weeks. I think that's he does a lot with those. But I think that's all for this scene, and I'd like to thank you again, JD, for coming on and talking to us. For those listening who haven't heard you, why don't you go ahead and take a moment and let them know about your podcast and where else they can find you online?
Yeah, so you can find everything we do at InSessionFilm.com. If you haven't listened to the show, I guess you could possibly join us at a very interesting time in our span, because we've speaking of formats, we've completely reformatted our show just a few weeks ago, because I have one son already. I got another one on the way, and my life is way too busy for me to edit a show and spend 20 hours on it. I can't do that anymore. So we've reformatted the podcast, and we're doing a lot more video now. So if you want to see us on YouTube, you can join us over there at youtube.com/InSessionFilm. But we do have a main show that comes out every Sunday, Monday-ish, depending on when we can record. We have podcast reviews that come out throughout the week as well. And we also have written content. We have a team of writers over at the site that I love. They do such a great job. So between the podcast and the written content, we have a lot that I think you'll enjoy. So again, you can find everything, links to the podcast, links to socials, all that stuff at InSessionFilm.com. And again, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks as always, Eric, for joining me and being my co-host through all of this. And for everybody else listening, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, and be informed of what movies and time loop TV episodes I'll be covering in future seasons. And until next time, I assume I've already told you about Memento?
Only every time I see you.
I always thought the pleasure of a book was in wanting to know what happens next.
Don't be a prick. I'm not reading it to annoy you. I enjoy it. Just let me read, please.